Good evening. Happy first day of October. It is October 1st. I think it's National Night Out for some folks, if I'm not mistaken, or it's coming up. There's a lot happening right now, and we are joined tonight to have a second part of a virtual watch party. Tonight, FCCS is hosting the Vice President virtual watch party for the Vice Presidential debate with Walz and Vance. I am Jay Artist Wright. I am the Executive Director of the Freedom Coalition for Charter Schools, also known as FCCS, and I'm so happy to have y'all joining. A quick shout out, we did this virtual watch party during the Harris and Trump debate with all the best intentions and hopes and dreams that there would be some conversations about education, that there would be a topic about education. And I want to take you back a step for a minute. During that debate, a couple of days before that debate, there was actually another mass school shooting. There have been several conversations across the country nationally about the teacher shortage that we're facing. There was a recent poll, there's been several recent polls, but a recent poll came out that showed that across the board nationally, kids still are not reading on grade level. And those that are most impacted are Black and Latino students. And quite frankly, that is where we come in, because FCCS as an organization, we are an organization based off of two values: self-determination and parent choice. We exist to help advocate and amplify the voices of Black and Latinos in the public education space who are looking for options, who are looking for choice. And we started this road specifically talking about charter schools. But in our communities, it's not just about charters. It's about choice across the board. How do we get our students, our babies, access to the best quality education that they deserve? And the challenge that we have brought forth is to challenge the national debate on this issue. In July, FCCS did a poll, and the poll showed that education is one of the top 3 issues that most swing state voters, specifically Black and Latino swing state voters, are interested in hearing from this administration. But yet and still, it was completely silent. So we wanted to go this route again, one, because we had an amazing outcry of people who said we love this. You know, we had over 500 views, and we were streaming for a really long time. A lot of y'all stayed to the very end. I know it was a late night on the East Coast, and so I appreciate that, and hopefully you'll stay with us again. I'm seeing y'all come in the chat right now. Thanks so much for joining, Johnny and Jessica out of Dallas and Atlanta. Keep it coming in, because tonight's debate is the vice presidential debate, and quite frankly, we are still hoping that education will be some part of a platform. And why shouldn't it be? It should be a part of the platform, considering the state of education and considering where we are right now within our country. One of the things that I've been anticipating is like, okay, well, if they don't talk about education, what else would they talk about that would be education adjacent? And y'all, it's everything. If we talk about the workforce, we can't talk about the workforce without talking about the need to have a proper trained education constituency or base of people or students who can go into that workforce. If we talk about healthcare, you know, a lot of the most atrocious issues that happen in healthcare, whether it be diabetes or heart attack or heart disease, are happening because people are not educated and not informed. If we talk about, you know, poverty, Black and Latino communities specifically depend on a quality education to help advance them in poverty and in the workforce. And let me not be mistaken, because Trump made this mistake one time of associating poverty with Black folks, and I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if those issues come up, they are adjacent to education. And so why can't we make education the center of what this next administration should be thinking about? Final point that I will note before we bring in our guests, we have some ultimate rock stars backstage that are going to be joining us, is that, you know, this work does not happen in a bubble. Like, a lot of this work requires all of us, parents, teachers, community leaders, church leaders, to also just continue to express our voice. And so I'm really excited to have everyone join, because I'm relentless. I'm like a badger. and the people that I work with are. And so if this does not become a part of the discussion, we are going to continue to be relentless to make sure that it is. I will say that we've had some movement in the last couple of weeks. We had an opportunity to speak with the DOE last week. And so shout out to the Cardona's team for having an opportunity to speak with FCCS and hear a little bit about the polling that we did. But the reality is that when it comes to public education and educational choices and school choice, Black and Latino people are left out of the conversation. We are seconded. They're not hearing from us from a first person perspective. And so let's use tonight via the chat, via this discussion, to make our voices heard, to let people know, quite frankly, that we are looking, we are watching, and we are expecting for our issues to be heard. And one of those top issues is education. So with that, I want to bring up our guest. We had some rock stars that were with us the last time that decided to come back. And so if I could, I would love to bring Dr. Charles Cole, Debbie Vinny, and Victor Evans to the stage. Hey, y'all. How y'all doing tonight?
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Well, thank you for having us, Jay.
Yeah, so glad that y'all could be here with us tonight. There's literally so much going on around the world, and it's interesting because I think all of us are on different time zones too. So trying to manage our time zone, and the fact that the debate is starting in the next hour, it's just a lot. So I really appreciate y'all taking the time. I'm actually joining y'all from a hotel. I'm in transit to go somewhere else tomorrow, so that's why you got the crazy background for me. But you too. All right. Look at that. But just by way of framing tonight's discussion, I mean, all of y'all, work in this space passionately and for a very long time, and have had many conversations about this. And, from Dr. Cole writing several research papers about it, to Victor lobbying about it, to Debbie, you leading communications plans. Like, we all have a vested interest in seeing education as a national platform. But I would love to hear from you individually, like, knowing that it quite frankly has not scratched the surface yet. And we are 35 days out into the election. What do y'all need to hear tonight? Like, what is it, is there still space, or are you just feeling like you go into the polls, but you ain't going too enthusiastic? I would just love to hear, like, how are you feeling right now? What are you thinking? Are you excited about the next 35 days? Are you reluctant? Like, what's the energy? So I'll start with you, Debbie.
I'm frustrated a little bit because I feel like people just take us for granted. They presume that they're going to have our votes and that they don't have to deal with one of the issues that's one of the most important issues to us, which is education. They can be light on substance and dance around policy, say very little, and there's no consequence for that. And I'm frustrated. I'm holding my nose, frankly, headed into the ballot box.
All right. Well, I mean, that's real talk. I mean, I understand completely. I feel like I feel a little bit better than I did, quite frankly, just honestly, when Biden was running for office. There obviously was an energy and an energize around it. But, I think now I'm motivated to go to the polls per se, because I think that we've got some more substance in the poll. I mean, in the votes. But quite frankly, I'm still not very pleased. Victor, how are you feeling?
A lot of questions still need to be answered, right? No one has really owned the education debate, right? No one's really taken a dive into where they stand on issues that affect Black and brown children, or honestly, any children, right? So here's a chance for the two VP candidates, J.D. Vance, Tim Walz, to really dive into that. Vice President Harris, former President Trump, I mean, they failed to even address any of those educational issues that we all care about. So, the VP candidates have a chance now to kind of, cement what their campaigns should be doing and what plans they have for kids.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And here's the thing. I mean, I hate to be too optimistic, but Walz comes from education. Like, how can he not be talking about this? But before we go deeper into that, Dr. Cole, love to hear your thoughts. What do you think and how you feeling?
Oh, I was just enjoying the conversation and listening to them, man. I am you know, I'm definitely one of the people that was disappointed that we were not talking about education earlier. But it kind of is what it is. I think, you know, to VP debates is kind of like, I don't know if it's going to make you choose a side between Democrat or Republican, but what it might do is if you are somebody who's tepid as a Democrat and was trying to decide if you was going to go vote or you was going to stay home, this might be a really important debate. If you was a Republican, it's like, I'm kind of tepid on the Republican Party. Am I going to vote or am I going to stay home? I think that the VP debate is kind of to round out those people. As far as the school and education piece, look, I feel like I know where both groups stand on it. I feel like the Republican side is like, hey, we want to get rid of Department of Education, centralized, you know, overextended government, things like that, more choice, things and that and the third, but you got to sign on to everything else that they want to do. And I think the Democrat Party is very strong in teachers unions and traditional schooling, even though a lot of them send their kids to private schools. I think it's going to be very interesting. I know I'm leaning Democrat for a lot of different reasons per se, and this isn't going to change what my vote is, but I do want them to engage in a dialogue that leaves people more educated on where these platforms are. And for single voter people, for single issue voters, I hope that it's enough information tonight that helps them make a choice either way.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you mentioned something that I wanted to segue into, and that is Project 2025. You know, it is what, a 900-page document. About 44 of those pages are strictly education manifesto, you know, dismantling. I don't know what other term you could use. And Debbie, you mentioned this as well. Like, there's a gloss over of the thing. Like, so like I've seen a lot of recent campaign ads. It's like, if you don't want Project 2025, what do you call it? Take over your democracy, then you need to vote this way or that way. They're still not really explaining what's in it. And at the same time, I find it very interesting that there is no counter to Project 2025. Like, if we know Project 2025 exists, if we know that it has all these potential detriments, if one side is saying that it has all these potential detriments, we're still not very clear what the other side is saying. So very much like what you guys have named, I am.
Well, the other side has said something, but it just hasn't gotten a lot of. The other side has said something. It just hasn't gotten a lot of airplay. And I'm of mixed opinions about whether that's a good or bad thing, but the Democratic platform language related to education is bad, quite frankly, from my perspective, and I think from the perspective of everyone that's on this call. And it does offer a different proposal. While I'm never going to suggest that our schools don't need to be fairly funded, I think we all understand that it's more complicated than just dumping money on something that's not working. And we also know that the platform language takes direct shots at charter schools, which are the only public schools that are growing in this country, and some of the highest performing schools that we have. So that's not encouraging. And I'm thankful, actually, that it hasn't gotten a lot of airplay, that people have not been covering this in the media, because I feel like that in some ways would give it even more oxygen. But at the same time, it's there. It's like, this little snake that's crawling around on the grass that can strike at any time.
It's a really good point. Did anyone else? I think I went out for a second, so my apologies for that. Did anyone else have a comment to make about that?
This is about Project 2025?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that, I would tell people, don't wait for other people to necessarily do a breakdown, explain it. I think I've talked about it in a few places. I can try to put some stuff out there. I focused on specific parts of it, but basically for people that are confused about it, it's basically just like a North Star, guidance star for that type of Republican, right? So like, hey, this is how we take the government here. This is what government should be. It's just their ideals kind of spread out into a playbook around, smaller government. They don't like overreach. They don't like taxes, things like that. And there are some things in there that kind of give marching orders to how one should be. So while Trump may say things like, hey, I don't know, I'm not part of that, I don't know anything about that, the people, if he did win, the people that he would put in his cabinet will, for lack of better words, be on code with that. And it's like a rallying cry. because these folks feel like they're losing the country. I don't agree with them, but that's but if you're waiting for somebody to tell it to you, one, you should definitely, there's ways to kind of get it summarized, and two, break that thing up, throw it in Chat GPT, find an aggregator, find articles about it. But without it, it's going to continue to be the boogeyman, and you won't know how to combat it if you don't know what's in it.
Well, can I jump in?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go right ahead.
So I don't disagree with what you're saying, Dr. Cole. I do think that there is quite a bit of language in there that you can just drive a truck through. And so
speak to it. Like, a lot of our viewers don't even know the language is in there. We don't got to be detailed. Tell us what it is.
So, there's, for example, a strong call that parents should have the right to decide what their kids are taught, where their kids go to school. Now, we're not necessarily diametrically opposed to all of that. So we like the idea, obviously, of being able to choose where our kids can go to school. And that's not so wild. More control at the local level, a lot of people find very appealing. It's not on its face a terrible thing, but I will say that there's definitely a role for federal backstops to ensure protections for students who are in public schools. And I always would be mindful of that. It looks like my friend Victor is trying to get in.
Yep, yeah, awesome. I'm sorry. We also have Michael Blake join us in a minute, but Victor, I'll let you head us off, and then we'll have Michael join us. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's really isolating a lot of people. Project 2025 has kind of become a third rail in even the Republican politics, to the point where, obviously, former President Trump, JD Vance, they're trying to downplay their connection to it, and it's taking us further away from the stuff that really matters. Now they end up debating in the debate about whether or not they stand behind Project 2025 or opposed to it, and then what happens? No one's talking about the kids, where the kids are, what the kids need, how to support the kids. So and then going back to what Debbie was saying about just what I call overall accountability, there does need to be some sort of backstop. Like, so you implement a bunch of policies that do away with different government agencies, then who's at fault when something happens to the kids or the people in general? There has to be some sort of accountability backstop. Someone has to be responsible. So,
yeah, I appreciate that. And the man, the myth, the legend.
I was gonna respond to. I guess I can do it a little later. I just want to make sure I responded to the sister, but.
No, sure, absolutely. I'll give y'all a chance to talk. I want to just be cognizant and respectful of Reverend Michael Blake's time. Michael Blake has been in the trenches, specifically on the Democratic Party, was one of the people behind the scenes that led the first campaign for Black men for Kamala, I think like literally days after she announced. And so, Michael, thanks so much for joining us. I know we don't have you for a really long time, so I appreciate you chiming in. We were just talking about Project 2025. Love to hear, like, what are you hearing on your end? And then I also have a follow-up question, but I'll let you answer that one first.
What's going on, everybody? Good to see you. Sorry for our delay. I'm actually down at Clark Atlanta. We've got about a room about 200 plus student athletes. And we just talked to them about voting, talked to them about financial literacy and just how to get in the game. But I understood my assignment. I had to make sure that Jay was good. So I left the students to get out here right now for what's going on. Look, Project 2025, I want to be real clear with everybody. It is the written down architecture to take Black and brown people back to the 1920s, if not further. Just for some practical context, this document from the Heritage Foundation, where more than 200 Trump-associated individuals are a part of, says that it would effectively raise the cost of Medicaid for about 40% easily. it would eliminate the Department of Education. I just want to make sure we internalize that. It actually says they want to eliminate the Department of Education. On a night like tonight, why is that relevant? Because many people don't realize that in the midst of the J.D. Vance commentary about childless cat ladies, he is the lead sponsor on the bill to eliminate DEI across federal government. That's his bill. So when we put this in totality, you have a choice and a contrast, which we cannot ignore the dynamics of this. An entity in Project 2025 where they want to have a national abortion ban. They want to eliminate the Department of Education. Medicaid costs would go up about 40% in many states, including Wisconsin, about 41%. And you have the lead sponsor to eliminate DEI. That is what's at stake here. Now, I want to be real personal on this. On an education standpoint, I went to PS 79. I'm a kid from the Bronx, New York. You already know it's the home of hip hop, but I'm not going to do a hip hop vibe right now. I'm going to let y'all rock right now. But I went to PS 79. PS 79 is the elementary school that was written about in Children of American Schools by Jonathan Colesel, Savage Inequality. So I'm real passionate about what we do around education. And we cannot ignore the differences that exist. Now I'm going to take it a step further. When you think about the dynamic of why we're doing this tonight, and much love to FCCS, because too often we've allowed people to utilize the language of education, I'm using the lowercase e, to get confused about what's happening here. The first charter school that existed in New York was the Sula School. So I've never understood the dynamic where people make it seem like, well, we can't get down with charter schools and be Black. That's actually intellectually lazy and it's not intellectually accurate. Yes, to Johnny Storm, yes, Project 2025 states that they want to eliminate the Department of Education. And this is in the same vibe of how they think about other things. People think when we're talking about from choice and abortion and education, well, it can't be the case. They are literally communicating on other issues that the national government, federal government should not be a part of these things. It should go back to the states. And so if that is the case on one issue, why would that not be the case on the other? So bringing it back here, the relevance of what we're seeing in other all these places across the country for tonight and for the next 35 days is that voting has begun in places. And the lowercase e I was referencing around civic education and civic engagement of making people aware of what is happening in many places right now. The lack of civic engagement and awareness is creating a scenario such as in Michigan. Many people don't realize that voting is happening right now in Michigan, but you have to turn the ballot over to vote for the state Supreme Court. Many people around the country don't realize that in North Carolina, you got 747,000 people that have been removed from the voter rolls. Those are the things that we have to be talking about from an education standpoint and awareness standpoint. And that's why we have to make sure that choice and charters and the opportunities for families to do right by their kids have to be part of the conversations. So listen to what's said and what's listened to not said, but always go back to what I did raise. Anytime someone's trying to talk to you about Trump or Vance in particular, ask them about Project 2025 and in the writing, why would you want to eliminate the Department of Education? And what is your plan if that happens?
Yeah,
that's the next step they never articulate. And I think that's relevant for these conversations.
No, it is extremely relevant, Michael. And thanks so much for educating us a little bit more in depth about that. One of the things that we were talking about before you came on board is that, because we are bipartisan and some of us are, we share different party lines. So you have that coming from the conservative lens, the Project 2025. What does the Democrat platform say? And how can we, or why are we not hearing more about a counter to that? Can you speak to that at all? I know you have Democracy Project that you're working on, but can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, of course. Well, I think in large part, it's not that it's not being said. It's that media attention is distracting by the foolishness that's happening on one side. And so it's not that we're not talking about policies and the dynamic. Let's break it all down from a standpoint where you got a lot of brothers out here who are saying, well, I'm interested in Donald Trump because he'll make me more money. That's factually not true. There's nothing that connects to that because he gave me a check. Well, actually, he did not give you a check. The federal government gave you a check and Congress gave you a check. He put his name on a check and delay the check getting to you to put his name on the check. Now, if we want to talk about the policies, Vice President Harris has stated several specific things. Number one, a $6,000 tax credit for families, especially for a family that is just starting out, where you can use those funds as it relates to formula and diapers and other things when you're trying to have your first child and what happens in having that first child. From a small business standpoint, and particularly Black businesses, going from $5,000 for a small business startup tax credit to $50,000. That's a game changer, because for anyone, myself included, where I run 3 businesses, it's a tremendous difference if I know that $50,000 of how I start my business can be eligible to be written off so I can pursue those dreams as opposed to $5,000. You have literally heard nothing on the other side communicating what they would do in that regard. Why do I know that? Because this is the same entity that's saying they don't want the Minority Business Development Agency. From a housing standpoint, the greatest opportunity for access to net worth and equity is owning a home. Vice President Harris and Governor Walz has proposed a $25,000 allocation for first-time homeowners. Why? Because fundamentally, the major barrier for someone to be able to get a home is that they don't have money to put a down payment down. And so when we talk through the elements of all these pieces, how is that connected to education? Well, you have a lot of people who, when they are graduating, they're making decisions of, do I take a job to pay my bills versus fulfill my passion and live out my purpose? And if I'm in a scenario where I know that I can actually have a chance to buy a home immediately, I actually have the funds to start a business immediately, I actually have the ability for loan forgiveness, which on the other side, they do not support that. They are on the record of stating that. All of that is intertwined to what I pursue in my passions in education. If we're trying to figure out, well, how do you get more people to pursue the path of being a teacher and being in the school system? Well, it's a tremendous difference if I know that when I finish that I actually am not going to be saddled with debt. And so all those pieces are intertwined. It's all a part of the opportunity agenda that's been laid out by Vice President Harris. Now, I go hard in the paint all day, every day for her, because I'm real clear that when I compare the differences between the two, as a New Yorker, I'm not confused about the choices here. It's hard for me to understand when we're saying, well, why isn't one side saying these things? She is. She's literally saying it every single day. Where is she at today? She stopped campaigning to go and do her job with the president because there are people that are suffering and dying from this hurricane. And so the connected relevance here is she went back to the Situation Room to not only understand that, but to engage what's going on internationally and the bombs that are happening in Israel. Now, let's also be clear. The same pain that's happened for the Jewish community is the same pain you got to have the Palestinian community. You got to be relevant on that. And why is this all interconnected? Because you have on the other side, the former president saying, well, if I was president right now, this would not be happening. And so I connect all those things to education, because at the end of the day, the beauty of education is not trying to force someone to understand one thing. It's about giving them a culture of learning and a culture of understanding and a culture of clearly defining the differences in policies. And when we ask ourselves the differences between the two, they're very abundantly clear in what is happening. Lastly, from an education standpoint, you have someone in JD Vance who, again, literally is the sponsor to eliminate DEI, versus on the other side, a man in Governor Walz who was a teacher, literally was a teacher, who was the coach of the high school football team, who as a straight man led the Gay Straight Alliance because it was the right thing to do, who comes from a family of educators. How on earth are we having a conversation in a scenario around the two differences? And I see in the chat, I don't know if we cousins or not. I saw Lavelle Blake out here. So I clearly like that last name. So again, I just think it's a question around the opportunity agenda versus we're actually not hearing a defined element, and to tie them all together. If none of those pieces connect you, ask yourself, which of the two do you want to leave in their hands for 2 to 3 Supreme Court justices?
Oof. Well, there you have it. And Reverend Blake, I thank you so much. You really dropped a lot of science, and I just pray that this debate will be as substantive on policy issues as you just were, brother, because I really feel like I learned more from you than I have in the last couple of times that I've been listening to either of our candidates. And I really appreciate you giving that context and then always circling it back to education, which was just so sweet. So I appreciate you. Would love for you to stay on if you can. Keep the chat going. I know people have questions, and I think that Project 2025 question was pretty much nailed. We can drop the mic on that one. We got a clear understanding of that. Debbie, you had a comment you wanted to make, and then Cole, I'll come to you.
Okay. I do want to talk a little bit more just policy-wise of what's in Project 2025. So specifically, there's a call, for example, there's a lot of block granting. So if you think about how there are right now specific allocations of dollars from the federal government to go to specific programs like Title I, which is for high concentrations of poverty in K through 12 schools, or IDEA, which is for kids with disabilities. Specifically, Project 2025 talks about, rather than having those federal appropriations or allocations continuing, that they would be block granted and given to states, and states could determine how they wanted to disperse those dollars. So that's worrisome to me, because I like being able to rely upon our kids who have disabilities and kids who are in poverty having a reliable source of funding. Also, Project 2025 calls for eliminating Head Start, which obviously serves an awful lot of kids, but that is in favor of providing funds to individual families and really pushing home-based childcare. And the home-based childcare lines up with the idea of home-based schooling. And there's also a lot of interest in having a federal voucher program, but we've heard about this before, for example, when Betsy DeVos was Secretary of Education. And then the last thing that I think is important to know, something around data collection. So the NAEP, I think most people listening in will know that's the Nation's Report Card, which is how we determine how we're going to assess kids' performances year over year. They would like to add a metric in there that will be about family structure. So they would like to know, are you in a two-parent home? And what's the gender of your two parents? And they're very interested also in eroding some of the protections that exist under Title IX for LGBTQ students. So policy-wise, those are some of the specific things that are in Project 2025 that relate to K-12 education that should give you pause.
Yep. Well, I think between Blake and Vinny, y'all have given us a pretty good understanding in education. For anybody who's in the chat, hopefully you've gotten some more education about those issues, and feel free to continue to ask the questions. The other thing, I was laughing because I couldn't help but get over the concept of what Trump said. Like, I have a concept of a plan. Like, how many memes have we seen about that? Like, I have a concept of a plan. I pray that we don't have any of that tonight. But here's the interesting thing. Like, so, I think prior to Kamala's position, I mean, this may have came up a little bit when Al Gore was vice president. The reality is that we don't really know exactly all the things that a vice president actually does or is supposed to do, like in the writ large community. So I'm just curious to know, like, what do y'all think in the sense of knowing that here we have one candidate on one side that who has led a campaign to eliminate DEI, and we have another candidate on the other side that comes from a long history of education. Like, what do y'all think as far as like what the vice president position should do and how they should show up in their position should either get elected into office? Like, let's talk about that a little bit. What is the vice president's role, and what should be their role?
I mean, the vice president has a lot of things to do. And if you look at like Dick Cheney was probably one of the most powerful VPs in the history of being a VP. But aside from that, and just because people don't know what they do, don't mean that that is not an important role. They're essentially, the president of the Senate. That means that they are tiebreakers. They said, that their job is to whip in a lot of different ways and get votes. And then they tend to also have like a certain type of pet project or something that might have been given to them by the president or something that they might be passionate about. So you could have a VP that was wanted to somewhat be like an education type czar person, or somebody that specializes in like, foreign policy. Like Dick Cheney was very, very influential And when we invaded Iraq, he led a lot of those things. So I just listen, based off of everything that got said, and there was a lot said before here. If you still confused on it, like, listen to us. But I'm voting for somebody. Like, I'm biased. Like, my job is not to tell you. Like, I believe in agency. I want you. If you are confused about stuff, don't just listen to us. Like, listen and be entertained and help. But that should just be guiding you, so you can go learn and read up on these things on your own. You just don't want to be at the whim of other folks. And I'm not a surrogate, you know what I'm saying? But I'm voting over on a certain side because I know what those policies are. I know, as somebody, like, I have student loans. I'm in the middle of the process of getting those loans forgiven, and then the Supreme Court shut that down. So I'm very hopeful, and I'm hoping that a Harris-Walz ticket will pick that back up. I don't know if they will, because they haven't said anything about it, and they kind of got their butts kicked by the Supreme Court, and it's a conservative court, so that might be a wrap, right? So, but I think for you need to figure out, like if it matters to you, you should go and kind of learn some of these things. And I don't want to be super long-winded. I will just say, here's some of the things that's in Project 2025 you probably want to know about. Warrantless surveillance is something that's mentioned in there, right? Like,
wait, I'm sorry, speak to me again. What is that? I didn't hear it.
Warrantless surveillance.
Okay.
And you can put me on screen with everybody else. It's all good. I don't need the full screen. I don't like the full screen. Undue force on protesters, right? Like, that's something that's in there. Limiting voting access, like making it harder for people to vote in certain ways. Gutting abortion access, like even more than what it already is. Mass deportation. Now, here's the thing. You might be on board with some of those things, right? Like, when people say the Department of Education want to get rid of it, it doesn't mean that it's just it fully goes away. What happens is there are certain federal responsibilities that would get couched in other departments, and there'll be certain things that would be handed back to states. Again, Republicans believe in small government, less taxes. They believe that's too much oversight, right? So think about those things as you start to make decisions. But I would implore everybody, it's not hard to go and find this stuff. And I will end on this, Jay and team. It is these candidates' job to sell us tonight. That is the point of the debate. It is not for us to be the people that's debating on their behalf, right? It is like, let them do their job. Like, that's the reason why we have debates, right? Because if that were the case, what's the point of even having it? So I'm interested to see where they go, the decisions they all make, and I think you all should be paying attention.
Now, I appreciate that, Dr. Cole. And one thing that I will add to that is that people use different information streams to get information. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why FCCS has set this platform up is because there are people on the fence. There are people who, quite frankly, are maybe intimidated by language. Policy reads a certain way. Mm-hmm. There are people who actually, there's still a major digital divide that we don't talk about. And people don't know how to get direct access. So I encourage everyone here with what we've said here, listen intently to the debate. One of the things that we also, somebody may have mentioned this, back in the early civil rights movement, when we were also fighting for the right to vote, there was a big push to suppress the vote and to have people not show up. I honestly believe that that's still going to be the case now, especially in places like Georgia, Tennessee, places where folks are really concerned, and specifically people who believe that the vote was stolen the last time. We know that after the last election, the whole Steal the Vote campaign, there was a lot of policy that was implemented to change the voter process. Like in Georgia, you can't even have a bottle of water given to you while you stand in the voting line. I mean, there are people who've been standing in lines, or who may be standing in lines for just prepared to stand in lines for a really long time. I want to talk a little bit about that and ask y'all, one of the things that I think we need to make sure that we're doing is getting people prepared for any and all things, right? So first and foremost, Blake mentioned that Michigan right now, they're doing absentee ballot and they're doing absentee voting. The deadline to register to vote is coming up. It's October 7th. If you have not registered to vote, please go to vote.org and register. If you think you're registered, go to vote.org and check your registration to make sure, and do that in the next 5 to 6 days so that you won't be surprised. And then if you have the opportunity to still cast an absentee ballot, I would suggest you do that too.
Isn't it different by state? I want to make sure, like,
Well, yeah, we put on the ticker, it's October 7th and October 21st. I think California is October 21st.
Yeah, make sure you check your state. Yeah, because
Right.
I think it's different per state.
But again, if you go to vote.org and put in your information, your zip code, what have you, it will direct you to the Secretary of State's website, and then you can find that information more in detail. But again, wanting to be a resource share and information share, I think it's important that we name that. The other part of that is come prepared. If you can, I don't know if every employee has that day off. I don't know if we made that a national holiday where everybody has November 5th off. I don't even know.
It's not a holiday.
It's a holiday for some of us, but not for all of us. I think my kids, their district, we have that day off. They don't have school that day. But the reality is that give yourself time. You may be staying in a long line. Find an alternative voting booth or voting place if you can. Like, these are some things that I think we have to think about that we probably weren't thinking about before. That call me a conspiracy theorist or whatever, but I just really feel like we should be, if you are plan on doing the traditional going to the polls on voting day, be prepared to stand in the line, have yourself something to eat or drink, and just be ready. So what do y'all think about that? Is there any other tips, tools, things that y'all do when you go to vote?
Yeah, so we're fortunate in my household. Our polling location is literally right across the street at Charlotte Park Elementary School. We take our kids with us every time we go vote, and they get their little future voter stickers. So one thing I will say is super important. The presidential race is important, but it's also important that you vote all the way down ballot, right? So there's school board races, there's ballot initiatives. I think in Nashville, where I live, there's going to be a ballot initiative on transportation, because if you've been to Nashville, you know how bad the traffic is. You're sitting around for a while. So, those are issues that are important that affect you day to day, right? And yes, what happens on the federal level is very important, but you should also think about, funding for your kids' schools, other roads, the crime. Like, do you feel safe? Is your city, is your state one of the best to live, work and raise a family, right? You got to think about those things as well. So down ballot races also very important. And spend a little time. Go to people's websites, see where they stand. If they're halfway decent, they'll be knocking doors right about this time. There's actually a door hanger right here for someone who knocked on our door the other day, and so talk to them. I think that's important. If they're spending time to knock on your door and talk to them, it's probably worth your time to ask them some questions. That's the least they can do. And then something I always do, haven't had to recently because it's kind of a pretty blue city, and you kind of know who's going to be running in a lot of the seats, and many people run unopposed here, at least in my precinct. But if you have a lot of contested races, one thing I used to do when I lived in Memphis, and there's always contested races, just look at the sample ballot. Each party usually sends out a sample ballot, and the election commission will send out a sample ballot, and just kind of make your notes on who you want to vote for. Start on top of the ticket with president, all the way down to county assessor or whatever that seat is, right? So that's a little helpful tip for those of you.
That's a very helpful tip. That is a very helpful tip. That especially that sample ballot. I didn't realize that's something that I do. That I just figured everybody else did, but that really helps you get in there and get out really, really quickly. So thanks so much for sharing. Anybody else got any tips, things that they do on voter day? How do you usually vote? What's your day like?
Well, I do early voting.
Okay.
And sometimes I will show up multiple times at the early voting site because there are people out there who are campaigning, and I quiz them. So I will go to folks who are trying to pass out flyers to get me to vote for them, and I'll go, well, tell me how you stand on this particular issue. And I'll get into pretty robust conversations in the parking lot and get a lot of stuff done like that.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Cole, any insight there?
No, I just get up and go. It's not a big. I just go to my little spot. When I was living in Oakland, now when I live back in Illinois in the Dalton area. But we got a lot of stuff going on like locally. It's gonna be a lot of things, probably even hotter than the damn election. We got way more national attention in our little town than we would care to, and I think there's gonna be some changes come election day. But no, I just get up, go, make sure I got time to do what I need to go do. Do my little vote, man, double check everything and peace out. I wish I had some more wisdom, but it really just, especially in Oakland, I've never waited in line to vote. It's just I've never had to, like, ever. So, and I vote kind of all the time. So yeah.
Well, so let me ask you, you have something to add, Victor?
He was muted. Yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute. One thing I will say, and this is just me, but I'm typically an election day voter. I think part of it is, I like the build up, but also, a lot of stuff happens in the last 48 hours of an election. You might have an oppo piece drop and it might totally swing the election the other way, right? Obviously that can happen more so in primaries and whatnot, but that's kind of how I view it. So you just never know what's going to drop about a candidate. So just stay vigilant, people.
It happened with Hillary. It definitely happened with Hillary. When their FBI director dropped what he dropped right by that election time, it swung a lot of stuff. So,
well, I tell you what, we're living
I'm like, just in case something happens, I'm gonna get my vote in.
I was just about to say, across the board, there is so much happening so fast that we have our access to immediately. When I wake up in the morning, I'm like looking at my phone, like, what am I about to read today? So it's a lot. I love how you said your nerves are bad. But this is the reality too. The reality of it is that we are still in a democratic country where we have people that are supposed to inform how we live, and if you are not registered to vote, if you are not a part of that process, then you really have no reason to complain. And I think that I hate to be cliche to say this is the most important election ever, because I'm sure everyone.
We shouldn't do that.
Yeah,
I
think every election is
had that conversation, but yeah,
I think every election is an important election. But I will say this about this particular one: this particular election is a tipping point, I believe, for a lot of things. I think that we don't give a lot of credit to the administration, as you just spoke about, Cole, who, with the Early Secondary Education Act and the student loan debt that we've all incurred being first generation college students, the fact that people had an opportunity to have loan forgiveness, that is monumental. And as someone who's a first generation college graduate, that in itself means a lot to me. There is a lot on the table. The fact that, we've seen the Supreme Court eliminate affirmative action, the fact that we are continuously having these conversations about, I hate to bring it up again because it seems like it's a cliche, but there's still people talking about book bans and anti-CRT. We are really at a divide right now, and it is on a socioeconomic level and a racial level. And so I think it is important that we look at that and we don't take it lightly and think, okay, it doesn't matter who's the next person in office because it ain't nothing going to change. I don't believe that. I think a lot will change depending on who's the next person elected. We are 10 minutes in before the actual debate itself starts. So I just got to ask y'all some final questions. So what is the one thing that you are hoping somebody steps up to the plate and says tonight? If you hear, you're going to be like, yes! Or what is the one thing where you got your tequila in your shot glass ready to, every time they say it, you're going to take a shot?
They're not going to talk about education, which is very sad. But the last presidential election, the swing states by themselves that determined who won. It was less than 400,000 votes. And y'all, there are double the number of charter school kids in those states, in every state. That makes me sad because it won't come up, but the math is very clear on that. So rather than what I hope they'll say, I'm going to flip it around. And I want to suggest to everybody, no matter who wins this set of elections, because Congress makes laws, they also affirm Supreme Court justices. So this is extremely important. What Victor was saying about down ballot elections, no matter who wins, even if you didn't vote for them, they work for you. And our work is to hold them accountable for what our agenda is. We have a lot of power if we remember how important it is to hold them accountable and to raise our voices for what we need.
Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate that. Like that motivation there. Victor, what you got to say about this?
Yeah.
Shot glass or hope? Which one?
Well, I want them to just focus on the kids. If they do get into the education, and if it's on the slate of questions for the moderator, let's focus on kids. You know, JD Vance is really big on family, and family is the center of the community. So, like, keep it about the family, keep it about the kids, right? Beg your pardon?
No, I was just being facetious. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and you know, and Walt is a former teacher, right? But you know, are you going to be and a former football coach, right? Now, are you going to be for the unions, or are you going to be for the kids? Like, where do you stand on that, right? So each one has an opportunity to kind of make their thoughts known about and where their priorities lie. So we'll see what happens.
All right. I like that. I got a comment to make about the for your union or for the kids, and Nicole, then I'll come to you. But I think this is one of those unique situations for education that we got to move away from that debate somehow, because and I've said this and I said this before, like the way that the education narrative is moving right now, there is no one person, one entity, one type of system that's going to fix it for us. So like we got to be all in. And so to that degree, I would challenge that either or and be like, how will you work for education for the unions and for the teachers, and how will you work for the students as well, and for the parents, because that is the pinnacle piece to this that people often don't talk about. Like the parent engagement piece, to me, is the tipping point on your child's education, and whether you engage with them or not really determines the level of success, in my opinion. But Charles, let me come to you. Thoughts, shot glass or hopes? Where you landed?
I mean, the middle. Like, here's what I think that there actually is a good chance that they'll discuss education, because there's a huge strike happening right now with longshoremen, and that's a great opening spot for Waltz to really flex his power and his backing of unions. And in this world, unions are seen monolithically, which I would advise you all at home to not do that. I've dealt with some very powerful unions. I've dealt with the nurses union and teachers union. Both are very powerful. I have a lot nicer things to say about the nurses union than I do about the teachers union. I think the other thing that I'm looking forward to, I'm not looking forward to, but just hopeful of, like, sell me. Like, I am the end user. Like, try to get my vote. What does that look like? Like, this is the purpose of a debate. Why do I want to come over to that side? Like, let's see what that is, right? And again, my vote is pretty much locked in because of just where I land at, but I'm trying not to lean too much on where I'm going, because I think it's more about us as a citizenry. And I think that if we don't start like demanding certain things we talked about, or don't start demanding certain people be held accountable to things, and they're going to keep acting like they own your vote. They're going to keep treating you in that way. And, but as far as like, is this the most important election? I think it's an important election. I think elections are important. I think that we have bastardized that term. Like, we talking about a time, there was an election for Lincoln, man. Like, there was a civil war, and then his
of our time. It's the most important election of our time.
I'm just saying, man. Because this is why I think we're gonna have a lot of people staying home. I think that because a lot of this stuff feels disingenuous. Like, you can't keep trying to scare me into certain things. You can't always use hyperbole. We've used that up. You know what I'm saying? I think it's like, now, what is going to work for you? What's going to work for your kids? And again, regardless of who wins, you should go vote. But regardless of who wins, you still got to be ready to fight. You still got to be ready to make sure you get the things that you need. There's going to be things that you might like and dislike about both of these parties. These are not our saviors. Right. You are not voting for who you want to date. You're not voting for who you want to have a beer with. You're not voting for who you can hang out and chill with. You are voting for somebody who is supposed to be an agent of the state for you, and which one matches up the most on that. And so that's what I would say. But as long as your vote is automatic, then why would I ever talk to you?
So that's interesting. Does anybody else feel like, people are going to stay home? Like, am I hopeless optimistic to think that there's been some reigniting of this idea that like the last, 30 days have lit a spark for people to be like, okay, you know what, I'm not going to stay home? Or do you still think that this is, I do believe it's still going to be a close race, but, are people going to stay home? Do you still think a large majority of our voters are going to stay home?
I wouldn't say majority, but I think a lot of people are going to stay. But I don't know. I think that's what people are fighting tonight. But
yeah,
that was to the other folks. So let me be quiet.
Anyone thoughts about that?
Well, the data, right? So data tells us two things. One, there are more people who registered to vote over the past 60 days. That's true. We saw a large influx in that, and particularly amongst young voters. That's true. Also, most Americans don't vote. It's true. So less than 50% of Americans vote. And I don't suspect that number is going to look vastly different in this election than it has in prior ones.
Yeah, I don't think it'll, to Debbie's point, the numbers will fluctuate much. What I will say is I think the difference maker will be people who are the single issue voters. And if there's a message that resonates that causes them to cross over, I think that'll be the difference.
Yeah.
Whether that be, your 4-4s on either side, which that'll be tough to do, but more so your 1-4, your swings, high propensity swings, I would say, are the ones that both sides should be targeting with their messaging.
Absolutely. And again, FCCS in our polling, we actually polled Black and Latino swing state voters for that reason, because that demographic was the demographic that both sides are trying to grab right now. And again, education was one of the top 3 issues. Workforce job development was obviously another one. So here's what we gathered. We've got about two minutes before the debate is about to start. And I want to make sure we can summarize this really quickly. First and foremost, there's a lot happening right now. As Dr. Cole mentioned, the ports are on strike. So most likely they have to mention that. I mean, hell, there was a school shooting at the other debate and they didn't mention that. But let's hope that these people are a little bit more civil and have a chance to actually answer all the issues and topics that are asked of them. There's still a teacher shortage, school safety, workforce development. Hopefully those are issues that we'll hear about. I kind of agree with Debbie. I don't know if there'll be too much conversation specifically around education, but there will be education adjacent issues. We do have to talk about the economy. We do have to talk about, what's going to happen in the next cycle, with inflation rates and all of those things that are built into that. So those are education adjacent issues that we can still hold our feet to the fire. I loved what y'all named about just the sample ballot and being able to go to the polls ready and prepared. Like y'all, if you're listening, hopefully you got a clear understanding of Project 2025. You got a clear understanding of both the conservative stance on issues and even Harris's stance on issues. I mean, I did not realize the depth of some of the things that Blake shared with us about the $50,000 small business tax credit. And the $25,000 allocation and the $6,000 tax credit to families. So there is a lot, and hopefully both candidates can do their justice in supporting our presidential candidates as well, and showing up at this debate. We need to hear that. Like Cole said, there's still time. We can hear something today or tomorrow that could potentially still influence us, and so ultimately, we are hoping that they say something that can either keep us firm in our stance of voting, or if it changes it changes it for the better. The last thing I will say is that down ballot is probably the most important thing I heard tonight, because a lot of the things that we deal with are local issues that happen locally and those local issues impact us more day to day. And so there are still opportunities for you to get informed about local school board elections, city council elections, commissioner, judges. All of that is in your backyard, and you should be aware of that. Go to vote.org, make sure that you are registered by October 7th or potentially October 21st, depending on which state you are in. I thank y'all all for joining. Please stay tuned. We are going to be able to come back during the commercial break just to share any commentary, and hopefully we'll have a win and be able to hear more about education. But if not, just to know how the night is going. So stay engaged, stay informed, stay tuned. And to all of my guest speakers, you guys are rock stars. Thank you for joining.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Starts now.
Fight for every single vote, and we're going to take this country back.
And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know what's at the end of this little journey? Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
This is a CBS News special, live from CBS News headquarters in New York. America Decides, the vice presidential debate.
Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene, and now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago, a nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the vice president said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again.